right? Now, if you, for example, just get a sense of the way in which we are progressing, we are taking a look at multilateral organizations within the areas that we have currently mentioned, and what are the basic functions which are happening with regard to these multilateral organizations, right? Now, the next multilateral organization that we can take a look at in this aspect is NATO. NATO has been an organization which has been of some amount of significance in the recent times. Okay. Now, NATO is something that we can take a look at slightly to get a sense of what we are going to take a look at. First of all, let's take a look at the what you can call the Washington Treaty. The signing document of NATO is the Washington Treaty. We'll take a look at the Washington Treaty, and then we'll take a look at the, let's say, the current composition of NATO, and especially with certain Scandinavian countries which have become members of NATO recently, Finland and Sweden. We'll take a look at the current composition of NATO and the way that certain countries are becoming members of NATO, right? So from a prelims perspective, we can take a look at these two aspects, right? What is known as the Washington Treaty and what is known as the current composition of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We'll just take a look at these two parts in terms of understanding NATO. You already have a question from NATO in the main examination last year, and you possibly can have a question in the prelims examination also with regard to. Okay, now take a look at this. This is what is known as a North Atlantic Treaty, or what is known as the Washington Treaty. I hope that you keep your notebooks ready to take certain notes on these parts. What is known as a North Atlantic Treaty or a Washington Treaty was a treaty which was signed between the NATO members, the founding members of NATO, in the year 1949. Okay, the treaty was signed by the founding members of NATO in the year 1949, and the name of the treaty is referred to as the Washington Treaty. Okay, now take a look at what basically NATO stands for. NATO is what is called a strategic or a security alliance. A security alliance in the North Atlantic region. That is what basically the charter of NATO states. Okay, so if you take a look at this part, let's say Article 5 of NATO. This is basically the core of the NATO or the Washington Treaty. Please take a look at Article 5 of NATO. Article 5 says, the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. And consequently, they agree that if such an armed attack occurs, each of them in exercise of the right of individual or collective defense recognized by the Article 51 of the Charter on the United Nations will assist the party or parties to attack in taking forthwith individually and in concert with the other parties such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. This is what is known as the soul of NATO, Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. I please invite you to take a look at Article 5 of the Washington Treaty to get a sense of what the NATO stands for. What is the concept of a NATO with regard to these activities? Please take a look at it clearly. Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, which talks about the main point about NATO. It says that if all the members of NATO, they collectively forming the organization called as the NATO, an attack against any one of the members shall be considered an attack against all of the members, which means each of the members of NATO will find themselves protected under NATO. And let's say, for example, if Russia attacks Romania, which is a member of NATO, then all the countries of the NATO grouping shall contribute to fight a war against Russia. You see, so security architecture means that any country in NATO alliance, if it is attacked by any country outside NATO alliance, then the NATO powers will form a security structure for that country. That country is not only self-sufficient for its defense, it is going to be defended by the collective military force of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization members. That's what Article 5 of the Washington Treaty suggests. And I hope you get a sense of what it is basically trying to associate over here. Class, are we clear? Does it become clear to you, class, all of this? Yes. This is Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, this having been, let's say, for example, covered in Washington Treaty, Article 5, and trying to understand the nature of NATO as a security alliance. So, this can be slightly important for you to understand from the prelims perspective, that what are the, what you can call, guarantees which are given to NATO. So, a term that is used generally to describe NATO is that it is a mutual defense pact or a security alliance, or the program of strategic cooperation in the North Atlantic region between the European countries and USA. Okay, now the next thing that we come to is NATO members, and we are going to take a list of a few things with regard to what are the ways in which NATO members are in a way understood. Right, now the ways in which we can understand, for example, this part of who are the NATO members is two things. मतलब prelims के perspective से we can take a look at what you can call two ways in which we can understand NATO membership from the perspective of the prelims examination. Okay, so what are known over here as the founding members of NATO, right? When NATO was established in 1949, who were the founding members of NATO? The 12 signatory members who founded the NATO, right? So you have 12 founding members of NATO. That is what we're going to take a look at. Right, now take a look at this. Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy. Luxembourg was a small area at the time in West Germany, so you can keep it out for some time. Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, United States of America. Right, these are what are known as the 12 founding members of the NATO. Again, let's take a look at this. Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, and United States. And then there is Luxembourg, which was the representatives later on for what is known as the West Germany. These are the 12 founding members of NATO. So a question can come, which of the following countries was signatory to the Washington Treaty, which was the founding document for NATO? The reason why I'm emphasizing upon this is because, of course, recently we are hearing a lot of activities in and about NATO, specifically with the development of the Russia-Ukraine war and the joining of certain countries into the NATO. So you know for a fact that Finland and Sweden have recently become members of NATO, right? So if you take a look at this very clearly, you have three, let's say, Scandinavian countries as part of NATO. You have Norway, you have Denmark, and you have Iceland. These are already part of NATO. But the two Scandinavian countries which were not a part of NATO, which were Finland and Sweden, they have become parts of NATO in 2023 and 2024 respectively. So one question which is likely to come from this part is on the membership of Scandinavian countries. Scandinavia is composed of these 5 countries. One is Norway, then you have Finland and Sweden, and then you have Denmark and Iceland. These are the 5 Scandinavian countries, and out of these Scandinavian countries, a remarkable thing is to be understood that Norway, Denmark and Iceland, these were members of the NATO in the founding document. Finland and Sweden have become members of NATO, or in fact the last 2 members of NATO. The latest members to join NATO is Finland and Sweden. So you can possibly get a question from these countries. Which of them were founding members of NATO? Which of them are recently introduced members of NATO? So what 2023 and 24 in a way specifies is the complete inclusion of entire Scandinavia into NATO, which includes Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark and Iceland. The complete inclusion of the entire Scandinavia into NATO is what basically we are remarking at this point of time. So I am predicting a possibility of a question like this from the chapter of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Class, I hope you pay attention to this one clearly right now. Okay, do we get a sense of this, class? Yes or no? Right, so founding members, I hope you take a look at it: Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, United Kingdom, United States, Luxembourg, which was later turned into West Germany. Okay, so you see all the countries of the Second World War had cooperated with each other and created NATO. France, UK and USA, which were known as the Allied powers, and you have Italy and even Germany, which were known as the Axis powers. All of these came together to create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Right, that's the first thing that we understand over here. The last, what we are basically taking a look at is the last parts of NATO. Right, what I am basically going to give you is a list of countries which have become members of NATO in the last few years. Right, so we start from 2017 and we go till 2023. Now please take note of this with respect to the prelims examination factual information. Please take a look at this. Taking a look at 2017 to 2024. This is the part we are taking a look at. The country to become a member of NATO in 2017 was Montenegro. Okay. In 2020, the country to become member of NATO was North Macedonia. It is just north of Greece. Okay, so 2 countries which became members of NATO recently. 2017 mein you have Montenegro and 2020 mein you have North Macedonia. These are the most recent introductions to NATO. Okay, then again the recent of the recent introductions are these 2 countries. Finland becomes a member of NATO in 2023 and Sweden becomes a member of NATO in 2024. Remember, with Finland becoming a member of NATO in 2023, with Finland becoming a member of NATO in 2023, Finland has a direct border with Russia. You see, Finland has a direct border with Russia, so the implication of Finland becoming proximate to NATO in terms of its membership creates a very clear problem for the Russians, because now NATO has occupied a very important area in the Baltic Sea around Russia by having Finland. Right, so if one question comes simply, which is the latest country to become a member of NATO, the answer is Sweden. And maybe in some time to come later, we'll see the last country to become member of NATO in this entire structure is going to be Ukraine. Right, Ukraine in a way is fighting the Russian for getting itself included as a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Right. So Russia, Ukraine, NATO has already offered its membership to Ukraine, and also it has offered its membership to Georgia. But these two countries are not currently members of NATO. But let's say in future, possibly after the war is over or some kind of a truce happens between Ukraine and Russia, you can see possibly the introduction of Ukraine and also possibly Georgia, who have been offered membership of NATO in the NATO alliance. So please be sure to write this part: 2017 Montenegro, 2020 North Macedonia, 2023 Finland, and 2024 Sweden. These are the four countries which have been the recent entrants into the NATO, and the two countries which have entered the NATO is Finland and Sweden. And as I have told you that with Finland and Sweden, what is also remarkable is that the entire Scandinavian country zone becomes a part of NATO. Right? With the entry of Finland and Sweden, the entire Scandinavian region becomes a part of North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Are we clear, class? Class, do we get a sense of this? Can you take this down? I am highlighting this is slightly important for the prelims paper. This is right here in the current updates. So just to be sure you understand this part. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be current composition of NATO. May you have to take a look at two things. Number one, 12 founding members. And number two, 2017, 2020, 2022, sorry, 23, and 2024. Right? You have Montenegro, North Macedonia, Finland, and the recent one is Sweden. These are the members who have taken up the control and the membership of the NATO countries. Right? 2017, 2020, 2023, 2024. You have to understand this. Then the last thing possibly we can do is a very simple idea to get a sense of this. What is the procedure for inducting members into NATO? This is the question that we can take a look at right now. What is the procedure for inducting members into NATO? That's the question. And what is the answer to the question? Each NATO member has to agree for the introduction of other NATO members. Okay. Each NATO member has to agree for the introduction of other NATO members. That is the procedure for inducting members into the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Again, I'll repeat it. Each NATO member has to agree for the introduction of other NATO members. That is what we were hearing, that while Finland and Sweden were being inducted into NATO, it was Turkey who had raised objections because of the space that Finland and Sweden had provided to the Kurds. The Kurds are the what you can call the enemies of the state for Turkey, and they had given space to the Kurds in this area, and that is why Turkey had objected to the coming of membership in Finland and Sweden. And only when the reservations of Turkey were allayed, then Sweden and Finland became members of NATO. So the the procedure very simply says that all countries have to agree to the introduction of new members into the NATO. Even if one country disagrees, introduction cannot happen. Just last part over here, I can add something just as a trivia over here again is the headquarters of NATO. Where are the headquarters of NATO? Brussels. In Belgium. This is where the NATO is headquartered. These are the headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Class, are we clear about it? So we've covered two organizations over here, Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.